Welcome to the Jeremiah Patterson Show, and thank you for joining me this morning. So we are going to be doing special reports on multiple different things right now. This is essentially one installment of what this is going to look like. We're also going to have the evening news show tonight as well, so stay tuned for that. But I wanted to speak to you all about something that's happening in this country that among all that is going on in the news is sort of flying under the radar. And that is the attacks on the LGBTQ plus community. When it comes to the rights that have been newly won and, given in this country, among those rights, is the right to same-sex marriage for LGBTQ plus citizens. And right now we are seeing an all-out assault, an all-out war on those rights, protected by law or upheld by courts. And this is orchestrated and it is powered by the far-right Christian nationalist movement. And they are essentially encouraging and lobbying Republican politicians to ensure that LGBTQ plus citizens are stripped of their rights completely. And the ultimate goal here is to accomplish overturning same-sex marriage. They also want to just completely strip LGBTQ citizens of their civil rights and any legal protections that they have to defend themselves. And so back in March, I did a special report covering this featuring Marcus Vandrell. He's a life and gay relationship coach based out of Sydney, Australia. I'm going to play it for you now, and then I'm going to come back with some final thoughts. Since Donald Trump has taken office for his second term on January 20th, more than 300 anti-LGBTQ legislation has been introduced by state legislators. He himself has signed multiple executive orders attacking the community, and they have been a focus of his anti-DEI campaign as well. But it really is in the states where this is becoming more and more serious. Back in February, there was a bill introduced in the Iowa Republican state legislature to revoke the civil rights of trans people. Mass protests instantly ensued. Hundreds gathered to protest. You can see at this sign here, "Love thy neighbor" includes trans people. It's ironic that the party who preaches so much about, the principles of Christianity are so strongly antithetical to not only the teachings of Jesus Christ, but also the most important commandment in the Bible, which is to love each other as I have loved you. Amy Wichendahl is the state's first openly transgender elected to the state legislature, and she made a very serious speech, essentially warning about the fact of what this bill means and the ultimate goal here for Republicans in the state.
Put this bill down today because this is not the end. Those think tanks will ask you again and again and again to remove rights and freedoms from your fellow Iowans until none remain.
Yes, the goal here, of course, is to make it completely so that you're stripping away Iowans of their civil rights, or at least the ones that you don't want to include or the ones that you don't want to vote. That's how this works. You start with one community, attack them, denigrate them, revoke their civil rights, and by doing that, you can intimidate and use that same playbook for others. Of course, in 2009, the Iowa State Supreme Court unanimously upheld a lower court's ruling, making Iowa the third U.S. state to legalize same-sex marriage. 16 years later, they are on the opposite side of that fence. This bill did pass, and Iowa officially became the first state in the country to revoke the civil rights of transgender people. In Montana, Republicans in the state legislature were poised to do pretty much the same thing, essentially not fully revoking the transgender rights of trans people in that state, but essentially reducing, their civil liberties to what they could do in the state. Democratic Congresswoman Zoe Zafire, who is openly trans, stood up and gave this remarkably moving speech. And watch what happens at the end. Watch closely what happens at the end here.
Representative Zephyr.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Here I am again to rise on another bill targeting the LGBTQ community. I first want to start off and say, at its very core, drag is art. Drag is a beautiful art. Drag has a deep history in this country, and it is a history that is important to my community. If you are a woman in this body wearing a suit today, you are challenging gender norms that existed long ago. And in some ways, drag does work to challenge those norms. There were 3 articles of clothing laws 50 years ago that said if you wore 3 articles of clothing that were indicative of the opposite gender, that the police could stop you and arrest you. It was those laws that led to the police raiding an LGBTQ bar in New York and led to the Stonewall riots, one of the most important civil rights moments in my community's history. I also want to reject the notion, however, that these are, as the sponsor says, events where explicit content is expected or where audience expect risque entertainment. Drag story hours I have been to here in Montana, they are like Disney princesses reading to people. We had people come in and talk about this. These are spaces where people come up and they sit down in libraries, and parents elect to bring their children and learn about books and the love of reading, and also, yes, be involved in part and to hear stories told from members of my community. That is important and that is beautiful, and I do not think that we should be standing up and saying that this art form, because it's somehow connected to my community, is not allowed. But there's something underpinning this that makes this even more insidious. And the sponsor called this a fix to last session's bill. It's important to note that last session's bill, when it was applied, the first application of this was not on a drag show. It was to prevent a trans woman from giving a history lesson in a library. That's where this came up. That's how this is going to be attempted to be applied, as an attack against the trans community. And we have even more examples of that, because in committee, when the sponsor closed on this bill, he said, "This bill is needed," he said, and I quote his words, "because transgenderism is a fetish based on cross-dressing." Those were his words for why this bill is necessary. And I'm here to stand before the body and say that my life is not a fetish. My existence is not a fetish. I was proud less than a month ago to have my son up in the gallery here. Many of you on the other side met him. When I go to walk him to school, that is not a lascivious display. That is not a fetish. That is my family. This is what these bills are trying to come after. Not obscene shows somehow getting in front of children. We have the Miller test for that. We have laws for that. This is a way to target the trans community, and that is my opinion and in the speaker's own words. Please vote no.
Further discussion, Representative Essman.
Thank you, Madam Chair, to speak to the bill.
Representative.
I'm speaking as a parent and a grandmother, and I'm very emotional because I know the representative in C20 is also a parent. No matter what you think of that, she is doing her best to raise a child. I did my best to raise my children as I saw fit, and I'm taking it for granted that my children are going to raise my grandchildren as they see fit. Everybody in here talks about how important parental rights are. I want to tell you, in addition to parental rights, parental responsibility is also important. And if you can't trust a decent parent to decide where and when their kids should see what, then we have a bigger problem. So I advise you all to vote about parental rights, parental responsibility. And remember, we already have indecency laws in this state. We voted on one, I don't know, earlier this week, last week, sometime during the session. We all wanted to make sure we knew what indecent was, and now we know. Trust the parents to do what's right and stop these crazy bills. They're a waste of time. They're a waste of energy. We should be working on property tax relief and not doing this sort of business on the floor of this House and having to even talk about this. Please vote no.
Question now arises on the motion of Representative C. Hinkle that when this committee does rise and report after having had under consideration House Bill 675, I recommend the same be passed. Those in favor of the motion vote aye. Those opposed vote no. Are there absentee votes?
None, Madam Chair.
Has every member voted? Does any member wish to change their vote? If not, the clerk will record the vote.
Madam Chair, 44 representatives have voted aye, 55 have voted no.
House Bill 675 has failed to pass second reading.
13 Republicans flipped and voted against this anti-trans bill in the state of Montana. 13. Sometimes change is slow, sometimes change is small, but all the progress counts. I spoke with Marcus Vandrill a couple weeks ago about this, and essentially about also the attacks on the LGBTQ community. He's a life and relationship coach out of Australia, as well as an advocate for the community. This was our interview. Joining me now for the interview is Marcus Vandrill. He's a life and relationship coach and an advocate for the LGBTQ community. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's nice to be here, Jeremiah.
I wanted to bring you on the show to get your perspective on something that's happening here in the States. That's highly concerning. Republicans in Iowa have just stripped away civil rights protections for trans people as anti-LGBTQ attacks are ramping up across the United States. What do you make about this regression for the community in the United States, looking at this from someone who's in Australia?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I am literally on the other side of the world, and I just don't feel it's impacting people in America. Of course, I'm not directly influenced by it, by all of the decisions that are being made, but it's definitely having an impact of the mental health and well-being of the LGBTQ plus community here. What you can see is that this rhetoric and these kind of actions are not solely happening in the United States, but what is happening is that this kind of attitude is empowering others in the rest of the world to step up and start to express their views, which are really full of hatred and division.
The United States Supreme Court legalized gay marriage back in 2013, and there's reporting that it could be overturned with the supermajority that's on the court right now. And there is an all-out attack on LGBTQ plus rights, and I feel that it's part of a broader war on essentially the community meant to energize not just those who are, homophobic and transphobic, but also to energize the Republican base as this being something that's extremely, worth in terms of political attacks. How can the community and its allies effectively counteract these attacks?
I think it's a really interesting thing to start to think about because the way I see it, the LGBTQ plus community is about 20% of the population, between 10 and 20% of the population. So my question is, why do you not want to have 10 to 20% of the population on your side? The challenge I find with this is that it's impacting people's mindsets, people's health and wellness. And if people are living in fear, they're not going to be as productive and successful as if they were free to express themselves and free to be themselves. And as a result, they would be more motivated to contribute towards society, towards work. So the approach of creating this division, to me, is counterproductive, and it's really counterintuitive to you wanting to achieve your goals. So if you're asking me, how can allies and members of the community contribute to this? It's all about sticking together and expressing truly how they are feeling and what is important to them. It is about sharing the common view that it's really about kindness and being a human. It's as simple as that. I feel it's about being kind and treating everybody, every human, with equal respect.
Exactly. That is exactly, the whole point here in terms of all of us collectively as a society, existing together.
Yeah.
And with the surge of these attacks, how do you advise individuals in the communities, especially the youth, who are struggling with, fear, anxiety, or even safety concerns as these environments are becoming more hostile?
Mm. It's really hard to say because everybody has different and everybody has different circumstances.
Hmm.
But if I can relate it back to the moment that I found out on Instagram that Meta has changed its policies that we can now start to call members of the LGBTQI plus community mentally ill. There
Yeah.
were two things that were happening. First of all, I was deeply, deeply upset. And we all know that this is just the start of a movement which is going to make it harder. And and that way it is demotivating, it's demoralizing, and it's disempowering. But at the same time, I thought, okay, what can I do? What is my purpose in this? And how can I contribute to the world to make it a better place? And then for me, it's like, okay, I have to step up. I also work in an organization which is blue collar. So it is a difficult community to be working with. But I decided in that moment in time, it is time for me to step up and start to promote allyship and tell people what allyship is truly about.
Mm.
So that is then the first step for you to make a choice. Do you want to become disempowered or do you want to become empowered? Now, once you've decided to become empowered, you really need to start to think about how can you contribute. For example, I'm not the kind of person that would go in a protest march. It's not my energy, but I know it's energy for other people.
Hmm.
And I'm more of an educator. So for me, it is about sharing my experiences and having conversations like this, which will then help promote allyship. There's space for everybody. And for some people, they might actually have to be a bit more underground. So they don't feel comfortable in truly expressing themselves and putting themselves out there. But even just by being kind to people and sharing who you are with your intimate circle of friends and allowing questions that may be a little bit uncomfortable to educate people, that is even a great way of starting to support the community.
And in regards to that, in terms of hope and allyship and all of this positivity building around uh, a particularly negative moment, despite the major setbacks that we are seeing, there is growing movements of resistance and solidarity, as you just
Mm.
talked about. In the state of Montana, just this week, an anti-trans bill was stopped after a Democrat delivered a powerful speech flipping 13 Republicans, so the bill was not successful. What promising efforts or strategies give you hope for protecting and advancing LGBTQ plus rights in this current environment?
What I see is happening is that um, there's kind of a counter movement, I think is what you already said, to
Mhm.
what is happening in the Republican Party. And so let me just flip this a little bit away then from politics. I think what you see happening in general is that more and more people are becoming aware of spirituality and what it means in their life. It is about creating a life for yourself based on self-awareness, emotional intelligence, but also about purpose. So if you look at that, you see more and more people that are turning to things like spirituality, spiritual growth, and mindset, and in a way that then allows them to create a better world. You see more people turning towards energy healers and all of those modalities. So I think in general, there's a counterbalance happening to what is happening in politics, and that I don't think we should be ignoring. In a lot of ways, this might be a little bit of a resistance from the traditional structures that we have to something new. So I feel in a lot of ways there is a different movement happening, and I think that can't be ignored. Now, from the political side of things, that is really encouraging what you just told me. I'm not completely aware of the things that are happening in the United States. Like that, it's a detail that I wasn't aware of. But we need to start to see, in a way, how we can modernize our ways of thinking and approach that we can start to take. Another great example is I put a post out in my organization, and it was about me telling my story as a result of the meta decision. And I got so much support from that that it was really encouraging for me. So you can make emotional appeals that people cannot really argue against. You know, if you tell your experience, people cannot argue against that. And that might be an approach to take moving forward.
Once again, my guest is Marcus Van Drill. He's a life and relationship coach. He's also an advocate for the LGBTQ community. Mr. Van Drill, thank you so much for coming on the show, giving us, of course, an invaluable perspective to me and my audience.
You're welcome.
Once again, that was my special report covering the attack on LGBTQ rights in the United States. And since then, the U.S. Supreme Court has allowed Trump's executive order banning transgender people from enlisting in the United States military to go into effect. That has now just happened. The following month, the same court ruled in favor of Tennessee's ban on gender-affirming care for minors, which is a major setback for transgender rights. And this only gets worse. I mean, take a look at this. These boxes here in purple are where gender-affirming care for transgender minors is protected. The states in orange are where the restrictions are not in effect. And yellow is where those restrictions have been struck down by a court. But the boxes in red there, the boxes in red are where this procedure has essentially major restrictions and obstacles. According to the Associated Press, some providers have just stopped treatment already. Quote, several states where gender-affirming care remains in place have adopted laws or state executive orders seeking to protect it. But since Trump's executive order, some providers have ceased some treatments. For instance, Penn Medicine in Philadelphia announced last month it wouldn't provide surgeries for patients under 19. The president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, Dr. Susan Cressley, said the organization is unwavering in its support of gender-affirming care and stands with pediatricians and families making healthcare decisions together and free from political interference. End quote. So once again, that is not the only thing that's happening here in terms of the far-right movement, as well as the Supreme Court succeeding in eroding LGBTQ plus rights. You might remember last month that we covered here on the Jeremiah Patterson Show when the Supreme Court essentially permitted parents to have their kids opt out of LGBTQ books in elementary schools. And this essentially is a win for parents' rights, which has become a tool of the far-right Christian nationalist movement to not only control education, but also to censor materials that they do not agree with. Watch. The second thing that the Supreme Court decided on today was related to LGBTQ books in schools. The court ruled that schools must let kids opt out of hearing those kinds of books, which empowers parents, as this discriminatory practice has already been taking place across multiple conservative parts of the country. With this ruling, the court allows the country to be excluded from learning material that is in conflict with their religious beliefs. Essentially, this was a 6-3 ruling. Justice Sonia Sotomayor dissented and said that what the Supreme Court did today was actually enabling censorship. Calling the decision chaotic, she wrote, quote, the harm will not be borne by educators alone. Children will suffer too. Classroom disruptions and absences may well inflict long-lasting harm on students' learning and development. The majority closes its eyes to the inevitable chilling effects of its ruling. Many school districts, and particularly the most resource-strapped, cannot afford to engage in costly litigation over opt-out rights to divert resources to tracking and managing student absences. Schools may instead censor their curriculum. stripping material that risk generating religious objections. The court ruling, in effect, thus hands a subset of parents the right to veto curriculum choices long left to locally elected school boards. Because I cannot countenance the court's contortion of our precedent and the untold harms that will follow, I dissent. End quote. So this is Justice Sotomayor writing about something that we have seen throughout the country with book bans. We have seen book bans all across the country when it comes to just children's books in schools. And so what Justice Sotomayor points out here is because conservatives for so long have been horrified by the LGBTQ community, the censorship of certain books in schools, when in regard to not just to LGBTQ, but also in regard to race, in regard to information on slavery, that can effectively be just completely restricted now, as we've seen in cases like in the state of Florida. This is censorship. This is censorship. That was the goal here by conservatives, to get this before the Supreme Court, to make a big fuss about it. Again, that was our coverage from last month. You have to understand, this has dangerous implications here for what this means. Because their goal ultimately is not to stop, with just LGBTQ books in schools. It's really everything, anything that they're uncomfortable with, anything that they don't find conducive to what they agree with or to their agenda. You want to indoctrinate kids? Well, the way to do it is this: to make them learn what you only want them to know, and that's it. The United Nations Human Rights Council voted on Monday of this week to renew the mandate of an LGBTQ rights expert, a move supported by many nations, but the United States was not among them. The motion was agreed to 29-15, with 3 countries abstaining. We are becoming more and more against basic civil rights for minorities, not just across the world, but also here as well. And so, what does that look like when it comes to the U.S. being so staunchly against LGBTQ rights, being so staunchly against minority rights, being so staunchly against diversity, equity, inclusion? What does it look like when you fight back? Well, you get a story like out of Pittsburgh this week, where the city council has just passed 3 new bills that expands protections for LGBTQ residents, prohibiting discrimination in healthcare, and also if a patient is denied care, they can now report that provider to the city's Commission on Human Relations. And a third bill will reduce the penalty for engaging in sex work, giving the police the option of charging it as a summary offense instead of a misdemeanor. Councilmember Barb Warwick said, quote, "These are things that make Pittsburgh safer and really help protect our most vulnerable. Whether it's proactively making sure that we are not criminalizing being trans or not being discriminated against by our largest medical providers. These are all good things, right?" It's important to watch what's going on in your state, in your city, and your local government, because there is a lot going on at the federal level. There are also small acts of resistance to push back to what's happening here. I mean, yes, we are seeing the rise of authoritarianism across our government. We're seeing the rise of bans and revocations of rights that were, either enshrined in law or upheld by courts. We're now seeing a major revoking of that. But of course, with conservatives, their goal is not just to stop with LGBTQ rights. They want to overturn interracial marriage. They want to legalize segregation again. There are so many things that conservative Christian movement wants to accomplish. And amid all that is happening right now, I know there is a lot, but as I always say on this show, eyes open, heads up, stay focused. They're trying to throw multiple different things at you so that you're not ever focused on one specific thing. But guys, if they can revoke this civil rights of trans people, and just LGBTQ folks in Iowa. What does that mean for others across other states? Are we going to see a revoking of black civil rights in South Carolina one day? Or in Arkansas? Watch who's in power in your state. Who is as crazy, as filled with demagoguery and authoritarianism in your state that you need to watch. Vote in your local state elections. They matter just as much as the federal elections. As a matter of fact, they have more impact, more control over your lives than you think. Eyes open, heads up, stay focused. The Jeremiah Patterson Show is an independent news media platform. If you enjoyed this video, please consider making a financial contribution, as this is independent journalism and we do rely on your donations to continue this crucial work. You can donate at one of the following platforms at TJPS News. You can also become a paid subscriber to the Jeremiah Patterson Show on Substack at TJPS News. Please be sure to follow me on Blue Sky and Substack at TJPS News for more content, as well as on YouTube at the Jeremiah Patterson Show. You can also officially email us tjpsnews@gmail.com for questions, comments, concerns. Be sure to leave a comment and share this video with your family and friends.